onto the slides. So, as I think maybe Aaron indicated, it's been a long time for many of you since you went to an IOF Event Adviser Clinic. And so the Photo Commission thought it would be a good idea to go over some of those topics. Usually, IOF Event Advisers clinics run for the whole of one day, or often over 2 days, and include some outdoor activities as well. So obviously, I can only tackle selected items in this, and I hope even if you've been an event advisor for quite some time and are very experienced, there might be a few points that will be of interest, or maybe a few points that you disagree with, in which case you can let us know. So there's quite a few topics that I'll cover. I'm sure it will take less than the 1 hour and 20 minutes that we've got. So we'll see how we get along. And I'm going to start off with the IOF structure, because as an IOF event advisor, you represent the IOF at the event, and therefore you need to know a little bit about the IOF. And this is the general organisational picture. And at the top, you've got the IOF General Assembly, but that only meets every 2 years. So the body that meets much more often is IOF Council, and that now meets more like once a month, because it mainly meets online nowadays. And also to note, working on a daily basis is the IOF office, and you've already met today one representative of that. That's Henrik Skogland. You can see that we've now got good representation from the athletes, because we feel it's important that the athlete's voice plays a part in everything the IOF does. So there are advisory groups for every one of the 4 disciplines, and then they contribute a member to the Athletes Commission, and then 2 members of the Athletes Commission actually sit on IOF Council. So they're represented at the highest level. Then at the bottom, you can see the different commissions, and there's the 3 support commissions for IT and MAP and rules. And if your world ranking event has got a problem in one of those particular areas, then the relevant commission may well be involved in sorting it out. And then the 4 discipline commissions, and most of your communication, if you do have problems, will probably be with someone in the Photo Commission. And then finally, there are the development commissions, environment and sustainability and global development on the right-hand side. So the biannual IOF General Assembly was held in Edinburgh in July. And a major change was that Leo Haldner from Estonia retired as IOF president. He'd been the president for a good number of years. The new IOF president is Tom Hollowell from the USA, but he's lived in Sweden for many years, and his roles have included event director for the Swedish O-Ringen, Secretary General and CEO of the IOF from 2015 to 2022, and IOF Vice President. So he's now only been in post for 3 or 4 months, and we'll have to see what changes he wants to introduce. There are some key documents that a World Ranking Event Adviser needs to have at their fingertips. And in fact, when I'm organising a World Ranking event, I tend to download most of these into the folder I'm using for that particular event. I should just mention that I'm the IOF Event Adviser for an event in a week's time, and also for one at Easter next year, a sprint event next year. So some of what I'm saying has been stimulated by our discussions about those particular events. So there's the IOF Photo rules, and as you probably know, you don't need to use the full version of the Photo rules with all the details about World Championships and Junior World Championships, etc., which are really irrelevant if you're just involved with the World Ranking event. So there is a specific version, which is an extract of the full rules, which you can look at instead, and that's a bit shorter. Then, very importantly, there's the World Ranking Event Manual, which is the responsibility of David Roach, who you've just heard from, and he produced a new one for 2024. And that not only refers to the rules, but has lots of useful information and advice. Then there's the two mapping specifications, ISOM and ISS PROM. And finally, there's the IOF control descriptions. And that's a particular speciality of mine, as we'll see as we go on. So David Roach mentioned rule deviations, and there's a rule that says the IOF Council may allow deviations from these rules and norms. And as David said, requests must be sent to the IOF office at least 6 months prior to the event. So do please try to obey the rules. If the organizer wants a rule deviation, try to persuade them to follow the rules. And if necessary, discuss it with the IOF Photo Commission. But note that the IOF does not always approve requested rule deviations. So I think what David didn't mention was, well, what do you do if your organizer has requested a rule deviation and it's not been approved? Well, you've got two options. One is you can not do what you were going to do with the rule deviation and just follow the rules as they are. Or the other is not follow the rules and forego World Ranking Event status. And in fact, I can tell you that next Saturday, an event that I was asked to be World Ranking Event Advisor for was going to be a long distance World Ranking event, and that was what the application went in for. And then the planner felt that the area was much more suitable for a one-man relay, and so asked if we could still have World Ranking Event status, but have that different sort of format instead. And after some discussion, especially because of the late nature of the request, it was decided that no, that wouldn't be allowed. And so the event is going ahead, the race is going ahead, but and it's a one-man relay, but it's not a World Ranking event anymore. I
David,
just want to remind. Yeah.
A question about the previous slides. How do you discuss with the Football Commission? That's a very good question.
The Photo Commission nominates a person who is responsible for each type of event. And for World Rank events, and in fact for World Masters as well, that person is David Roach. So normally he will be the person in the Photo Commission who you go to as an event advisor with your particular issue.
And those contact info will be found in the IOF Photo Commission webpage. There are email addresses for each of the responsible persons and also their responsible areas.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Jeske. So I just want to remind you about some basic definitions or IOF terminology. So when we talk about disciplines, there are 4 IOF disciplines. They are Photo, MTBO, Skio, and Trello. And then we talk about formats. By formats, we mean the different types of race. So in Photo, they're sprint, middle distance, long distance, knockout sprint, relay, and sprint relay. Now, the term event embraces all aspects of an orienteering meeting, including organisational matters such as start draws, team officials meetings, and ceremonies. A competition may include one or more races, but has one final set of results. So a race involves runners completing an orienteering course. So if we take the example of the World Championships, the recent one in Edinburgh, in that event, and it was just one event, the World Championships, for each class, M21E and W21E, or men and women, there were 3 competitions. There was a knockout sprint, a sprint, and a sprint relay. And some of those involved several races. The sprint relay involved only one race for each class. The sprint involved 2 races, the qualification race and the final. And the knockout sprint involved a whole load of races because of all the rounds. So an event may include more than one competition, more than one discipline format, qualification races and finals, and different classes. Now I'm just going to have a look at some of the things around the start. At a World Ranking event, starting time should be allocated on the basis of world ranking scores, with the best starting last, and David Roach already mentioned that. There are occasions when that isn't going to happen. For example, if you have 2 world ranking events, one after the other, it may be that you base the starting order of the second race on the results from the first race. And those without a world ranking score start earliest in random order. For an interval start, the start intervals are defined. There must be 1 minute for sprint, 2 minutes for middle distance, and 2 minutes or 3 minutes for long distance. Now, competitors who are late for their start time must be permitted to start. Their new start time must be recorded. And one of the jobs for an IOF event advisor is to make sure that the start officials really understand how the late starters are to be handled in a world ranking event. And sometimes the way that late starters are handled, if it's a big event with other classes as well as world ranking event runners, sometimes it may be that the other classes are handled differently for late starts compared to the world ranking event starters. So it's often best to have a separate start lane or separate start area for the world ranking competitors with specialized start officials to deal with them. So if you're late for your mass start or chasing start, then you just start as soon as possible. But if it's an interval start, if the competitor is at the start line less than half the start interval after their start time, they must start immediately. So suppose it's a 1 minute start interval. If they're only 20 seconds late, then they can start straight away. But as I said previously, you do need to record their start time. So you need an official, a dedicated late start official who's really ready to handle that. And the easiest way to record their start time is just to get them to punch a start box as they're rushing off to start. In an interval start, if the competitor is at the start line more than half the start interval after their start time, they must start at the next available half start interval. So suppose they're 40 seconds after their start time and it's a 1 minute start interval, then they have to wait another 50 seconds until 1.5 minutes after they were supposed to start before they can start. Then if it's their own fault, then they're timed as if they'd started at their original start time. So it's actually important to make sure that if they did punch in order to record their start time, that punch isn't actually used automatically to calculate their race time. But if it's the fault of the organizer, then they must be timed from their new start time. And in that case, their recorded time or punch start time is used in their calculation. But there should be no discussion with late starters about why they're late and who is at fault. The start time must be recorded, and any discussion can take place after their run. Now let's go on to the finish. The finish time must be measured at one of the following times. So when the competitor's chest crosses the finish line, when the competitor punches at the finish line, if a light beam is used for timing, when the competitor breaks the beam, which must be mounted between 0.5 meter and 1.25 meters above the ground, or when a transponder carried by the competitor crosses the finish line. So at a world ranking event, a punching finish can be used. And if you're using sport ident and using contactless punching, then it should normally be a contactless finish punch as well. And that's the simplest solution usually. Times must be rounded down to whole seconds. So, for example, 14 minutes and 23.8 seconds must be recorded and must appear as 14 minutes and 23 seconds. And if someone else did 14 minutes and 23.1 seconds, they get the same recorded time and the two runners are tied. And we say that because orienteering is not a 1/10 of a second sport. Just because we can measure times more accurately than 1 second doesn't mean that we should use those more accurate times. In orienteering, you're not on a standard athletics track. you're out either in the forest with fallen trees and all sorts of random things occurring, or you're in a town with cars and pedestrians and so on. So 1/10 of a second to decide the positions would not really be fair. Just a small exception, in races with mass or chasing starts, the results may show 1/10 of a second in order to correctly represent how competitors cross the finish line. Because with a mass or chasing start, the time is actually irrelevant. It's who crossed the line first and in what order. So, but when the results are published, the publishing process and the ordering process often relies on the times to calculate the positions. And so you can show the 1/10 of a second just in order to get people in the correct order when you publish the results. Now we have a rule that says 2 independent timekeeping systems, a primary and a secondary, must be used continuously throughout the competition. And that can often cause organisers and event advisors quite a lot of worry about how they're going to achieve that secondary timekeeping system. For a world ranking event, video recording at the finish line is recommended. And you can do that with a simple dash cam connected to a power bank, and dash cams can display GPS time on the video. Ted Finch, who you've already heard from, is an expert on this particular area. And the World Rank event at the time event advisor for next Sunday, this is what we're doing. We'll just have a dash cam on a stick continuously taking a picture of the finish. And we've actually had a discussion about whether does that mean that we need to make the competitors wear numbers. And this particular World Rank event, unfortunately, there won't be any spectators. So numbers aren't really necessary for any other purpose. And what I actually felt was that because it's rather unlikely that we'll need to fall back on the dash cam, and even if we do, then we'll recognize from their orienteering top or from their face or whatever who they are, that it's not really necessary to go to the trouble of issuing numbers just for that particular purpose. So now quite a bit about the courses, and the job of the event advisor is to ensure that rules are followed, mistakes are avoided, and fairness is paramount. I've just highlighted that. And the IOF Event Adviser has the authority to require adjustments to be made if he or she deems them necessary to satisfy the requirements of the event. We're often asked, well, what if the IOF Event Adviser and the organizer don't agree on something? Well, this rule says that the IOF Event Adviser has the final say and can tell the organizer what to do. And as IOF Event Advisor, it's often a good idea just to mention this to the organizer at the very start of your work, just to say that I hope you understand that we'll always discuss everything about the event and I'll always listen to what you say, but at the end of the day, I have the authority to make the final decision. Now, course planners often want to make the most technically challenging course, but it's a good idea to try to avoid anything unusual that requires special extra explanation or extra complications and which might cause problems. So some things to ensure. The area around control locations must be well mapped. For next Sunday, there was one particular control which was perfectly well mapped if you were coming to it from the expected direction. But if you overshot, the map really didn't make any sense. So I at first said the control location couldn't be used, but the planner really wanted to use it. And in the end, we improved the map so that actually it was okay from all directions. Features which are forbidden to cross must be very clear on the ground and on the map. And of course, that's a particular issue in sprint. And I have to say that last weekend, it wasn't a world ranking event, but I spent quite a lot of time in and out of bounds area, just because it was no different from any other terrain, and I just got slightly mislaid. So if you mark something as out of bounds, you need to make sure it's really clear, both on the ground and on the map. The control descriptions must be correct. And control descriptions are a sort of language, aren't they? It's a way of describing things not in English or in any other normal language, but it's a special language. And you do want to use that language correctly. And when I start an event and I pick up the control descriptions, I can almost tell straight away whether it's going to be a good course or a bad course by how many mistakes there are in the control descriptions. Now, the winning times are prescribed for a world ranking event. The long distance must be in the range 88 to 92 minutes. Middle distance 30 to 35 minutes. And sprint 12 to 15 minutes. And note that they're now the same for men and women. You need to check the minimum control separation. In the forest, we've had this rule for many years that controls must not be sited within 30 meters of each other. But when the control features are similar, then the minimum straight line distance between controls is 60 meters. So when you're checking the map, look at the all controls map, not just the world ranking event controls, if there are other controls in the forest as well, all the controls for all the courses. And first of all, look at the ones which are closer than 60 meters and make sure that they are distinctly different if they're less than 60 meters. And of course, if they're less than 30 meters apart, then that's not acceptable and something needs to change. In sprint, the minimum running distance between controls is 25 meters and the minimum straight line distance is 15 meters. We did used to have a rule about similar to forest about similar features, but in sprint that's really not so relevant. So 15 meters is the straight line distance. The running distance is about making sure that you've got enough distance between controls that the controllers stop flashing. Sorry, your SI card, your SIAC, has stopped flashing before you get to the next control. So some things to avoid. Controls on non-standard features, such as those mapped as a cross, circle, or triangle. I don't say you should never use them, but if you do, then you need to say in the final bulletin, as well as on the map, what you're using a cross or a circle or a triangle for in that particular event. because the competitor needs to know what feature they're looking for. And of course, if you just put it in the final details, there's a chance that people may not read it or may forget it. So, and if you just put it on the map, then competitors will never find it while they're running. They pick up the map and all they want to look at is where's the first control and so on. They never read the rest of the text while they're on the course. So I'd avoid those if you can and use more standard features, cliffs, re-entrance, boulders, and so on. Avoid legs which tempt competitors to go out of bounds. And avoid butterflies. Some people may know I have a particular aversion to butterflies for several reasons. One is, as a competitor, I don't really like visiting a place more than once, and with butterflies, you often have to go there 2 or 3 times to the same control. But I think more importantly, as an event advisor, it causes extra complications. Often with butterflies, you're having to issue one version of the map to one person and one version of the control descriptions to one runner, and then the next runner gets a different version. So that adds complications to the start, adds complications to the printing, adds complications to the IT, and also adds complications when you try and publish the results and look at route analysis, such as route gadget or live locks or whatever, if people haven't all done exactly the same. So I would avoid them if possible. Also, avoid bingo controls. Competitors should be looking for the feature and not for someone else who happens to be at the control. So avoid, for example, small depressions in a flat area where the presence of another competitor will give the game away. Whereas if there's no other competitors around, it's a really tricky control. And when the competitor is at the indicated part of the feature, say the north end of the cliff, then the flag must be clearly visible, not tucked behind a rock or something. So there's quite a lot of checking that needs to be carried out before the first competitor starts. Check that the controls are in the correct location, obviously. Check that the control units are working properly. And with SportIdent, that means that the punching units are time synchronized and also that they're active and will stay active for the duration of the race. Because typically, SportIdent punching units are inactive and have to be woken up by punching them. And then they'll stay awake for a set period of time until nothing's happened for a bit, and then they'll go back to sleep again. And once they're asleep, then if you come along with your SIAC, you won't get a punch unless you actually put your SIAC in the hole. So for an important event, it's really important that all the punching units are active for all the competitors. Controls must have some sort of backup punch available, as someone was quick to point out when I suggested using that mountain bike unit. And obviously, normally in a world ranking event, the simplest backup punch is just to have a pin punch. And you need to check, especially in urban areas, in sprints, have there been any unexpected changes in the terrain, such as new building work, gates locked, or gates open? You may have decided that out of bounds tapes are needed. Have they actually been put where you thought they should go? And are the run-in tapes present? And are the refreshment controls in place in a long distance event? And are the marshals in place? So there's a lot that needs checking, but it doesn't all need doing by the event advisor themselves. Obviously, the event advisor might help and do some of it, but the event advisor can't do it all. So use the local controller, and pre-runners are especially a good idea. Maybe in a world rank event, maybe some very good juniors who aren't yet quite up to world ranking event standard, but can run round in advance. Now, what happens if something goes wrong with your event? In IOF events, it's not allowed to remove legs where there's been a serious problem. So Rule 24.15 says the results must be based on competitors' times for the whole course. And it's forbidden to eliminate sections of the course on the basis of split times, unless that's been specified in advance. So what's the alternative? Well, I'm afraid if something's gone really wrong and the race is no longer fair, then the race has to be voided. So just on that point, bear that in mind when you're doing all that checking. Don't just think, oh, well, we could always take out a section of the course, because you can't if there was a problem. If to avoid the race, and that's why all that checking is really important. So in an IOF Event Advisers Clinic, we normally have some sort of exercise. Often it's in the wood local to the clinic. I can't manage that now, but as I said, control descriptions are my favorite subject. So we're just going to have a quick little exercise on control descriptions. And my planner has prepared these control descriptions for my event. There's 8 controls. It's a very good area, long legs. But I think he may have made a few mistakes. So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes now to have a look and see how many mistakes you can find. I reckon there are actually about 14. So I'll come back to you in 2 minutes. We've got 1 more minute. Okay, well, I hope you found at least a few. And yeah, there should have been 14 errors or things that I wouldn't allow anyway. So here's the original, and I'll just go through the red circles and say what I think needs changing. So as you'll recall, we've now decided that the classes for a World Ranking event are called M21E and W21E, so it shouldn't be M21 since this event is taking place next year under the new rules. The race, the course needs a climb as well as distance. The start needs a description. In this case, it's the path. The re-entrant has been described as shallow, but if you look at the IOF control descriptions, shallow can only be used if the feature is shallower than shown on the map. Now, if the feature is shallower than shown on the map, nowadays, the way to deal with that is to just amend the map so the map properly represents the feature. So shallow should really hardly ever be used. The cliff needs a height, 2.5 meters, and if it's at the center of the foot, which is the default position, then you don't put foot, you just leave it as cliff. I would always give a height for any features which are just represented by a point symbol, such as a boulder or a knoll. So I'd give the height of the dot knoll, in this case 3 meters. The cliff has got a height, but when we put the distances in the body of the descriptions, we don't put the M, so just 2.0 is sufficient. And you also need to say which side of the boulder it is. When you have two features, as in control 5, a junction, then you need to put the features both in column D and in column E. Now, the main feature needs to go in column D, but this one's for control 6, the large depression has ended up in column E, so it needs to be in column D instead. And it doesn't need a length and width because that is shown on the map, because it's essentially a contour feature. You don't need to repeat how big it is. If it was a small depression and shown as a U on the map and a U on the control descriptions, then indeed length times width would be sensible to have. Control 7 is perfectly all right. That's just a hill, presumably on the top of the hill. And control 8 is the marsh, but when the feature is a flat object, then we use edge rather than side. So it should be east side, not, east edge, not east side. And in a world ranking event, and I'd actually say in all events, you should never use navigate to the finish. The finish doesn't have a description, isn't necessarily on a feature. It should always be follow tapes to the finish.
Okay, David, thanks. We have a few comments on these.
Oh, good.
Starting with having an WRE on January 1st after the New Year's Eve is definitely an error.
Oh.
That was a joke, but for the start triangle, it's the path there. Is it where on a path? would be, I think that's kind of not accurate point of the starting point.
I think that's okay if it's obvious enough. I don't think that's going to generally worry world ranking event competitors if it's on a path. I know some people are very hung up about that they'd almost not allow you to put an event just on a line feature, but put a control just on a line feature, but I think that's perfectly okay.
Okay, yeah. Then the next comment is the boulder also in column D. I don't really get what is this as a comment there.
No, I think control for the boulder should be in column D, and as long as it's got a side, then that's okay, I think.
I guess it's about number 3.
Oh, well, number 3, yes, is a null, and I've... Oh, thank you.
You just didn't
yes. Yes,
mark it with the red. I think that was that
there
one.
Should be exactly. There should be an extra red circle because that the third control should be in the column D. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That made 15 errors.
Yeah, and then the next one is that the 8 controls for 11.8 is a bit few, but you already commented on that it would be an old school long distance with long legs. So
that's right. Yeah.
Then the next one is the height for point features. Is it okay to use 1.7 or 2.3, or rather round it to nearest 0.5 or exact meters?
Well, my opinion that is that I wouldn't bother with 2.3 because I can't tell the difference between 2.3 and 2.5. So I'd certainly round that off. But I think when you've got a rather small feature, there is actually a significant difference between 0.5 and 0.7. So that might be okay to use 0.7.
Okay. Then the next comment or question rather is that the shallow shouldn't be used unless it's shallower than shown on the map. Then it follows that the control is on a map error.
Well, typically the map is perfectly okay, but the planner thinks, oh well, it is a rather shallow re-entrant, so I ought to use that control description shallow, but that's not correct.
Then the next one is knolls in Scandinavia are mostly not situated in flat areas, makes it hard to decide heights. And the Ivar is commenting to that one that the dimensions should only be used if it's other than what can be expected. Small knoll is anyhow very difficult to measure the height.
Well, I'd just say that exact heights don't matter very much, but there is quite a big difference between, say, a 1 meter knoll and a 3 meter knoll. And when you talk about what's expected, I think we need to think about competitors who are coming from far away or from a different country, and they don't know what to expect. So we should not just think, oh, well, all the local competitors know how big our local knolls are, so we don't need to say. You need to think of the foreigners.
Yeah, okay. The next comment is would it be okay for a knoll to put northern foot if quite high and and control code starting from 31 instead of 3-digit codes, but that's not the case, I think.
So yeah, control codes can start from 31 if required, but as for the null, yeah, it needs to represent where you're actually hanging the flag. So if it is at ground level on at the foot of the null, then you should indeed use foot. If it's partly up the side of the null, then use side, as we've used here in control 3. And if it's actually on the top of the null, then you don't need to put anything, just null.
Okay, then the next one is it used to be best practice to avoid consecutive control codes all the way through the course. Is this no longer the case?
No, I think it's perfectly okay to have consecutive control codes.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is the distance to the start triangle.
That's right. Well, if there is a run out to the start triangle, then an extra line should go into the descriptions showing that run out distance. In this case, the start triangle is directly close to the start line, so that line isn't needed. So that's an optional line that can be used if there is a run out to the start triangle.
Yeah, okay. Then another comment about that path as a start triangle that disagree with the definition, the end of the path or intersection. That's more exact. We already discussed about that. But yeah, this was fun, and obviously thank you for taking this test and obviously looking a little bit of trouble with experienced EAs to discuss this with. So thanks a lot.
Okay, I'm glad.
But no more comments about this.
Okay, I'm glad that produced some interest and some feedback. So just a few words now about Sprint, because that has its own specialities. Map legibility is very important in Sprint, and you must observe the minimum dimensions. Passages between symbols representing uncrossable features should be 0.4 millimeters. And as it happens, 0.4 millimeters is the width of an uncrossable wall or an uncrossable fence, that thick black line. So it's actually quite easy to see whether that minimum dimension is being observed. Of course, these small passages are often very important for route choice, so it's really important that the competitors can make them out. And also the gap between two line symbols of the same color is a minimum of 0.15 millimeters, and the same for line symbols and area symbols of the same color. And the openings of fences, hedges and walls, there's a minimum of 1 millimeter. So this is all in the Sprint specification. Now, the minimum length for an uncrossable wall is 1 millimeter. And I want to have a look at that, because here you can see that we've got some rather narrow passages. In fact, the one in the middle near the top, the blocked off one, maybe only 0.4 millimeters wide on the map. But it's got a wall across it, which is obviously only 0.4 millimeters. which is below the minimum length of 1 millimeter, and that's a problem. So what they've actually done here is to add in some olive out of bounds to make it clearer that you can't actually get through that way. And I suspect that actually a runner could go down the start of that passage, but so the olive just tries to help them to see that passage, that they won't be able to get out the other end. And so you shouldn't just rely on that too short black line to block off a passage. You should either use olive green or purple to help the runners see that they can't get through. In this case, I don't really know why they've used the grey canopy, why they put that in there, why they didn't just make the whole thing olive green. But anyway, they've emphasized that it's not, you can't get through. And be very careful with multi-level features. Is the map clear to someone who's never been there before? So here's quite a famous multi-level area. It's actually the Barbican in London, and it's often used for City of London urban races, and it's all very good fun, but it wouldn't be suitable, I'd suggest, for a world ranking event because it's just too complicated. But if you've been there in beforehand, then it's actually not so difficult to understand. So as a IOF Event Advisor, you must be very careful not to become so familiar with the area that you forget what it's like to be someone who's looking at the area for the first time and trying to understand what's going on. Now, there was a big session on safety yesterday, and I suspect most of the people who are listening now will have been in on that. So I won't say very much more. Just remember safety of competitors, avoid or minimize head-to-head collisions, keep competitors away from moving vehicles, and avoid the temptation to include spectacular but dangerous features such as steep drops or difficult water crossings. And think about the safety of the public too. Avoid crowded areas and use marshals. But really, that was all very well covered by Daniel yesterday. What about the final map check? Before it goes to printers, check the positioning of control numbers and check that circles and lines are cut appropriately. But don't overdo it, because the circles and the lines have a good purpose for joining the controls and for showing where the controls are. And I've seen cases where people have been so keen to cut them that actually the circles have almost disappeared. Make sure that all the necessary information is on the map, the scale, the contour interval, the grid lines, and the IOF logo. And do get proof maps printed before the final print run, because what looks good on the screen can often not look correct on on paper. And as was mentioned yesterday, you can use the IOF example print to check the colours and so on. Getting proof maps printed, especially if you're laser printing, should be no problem at all. Now I want to say a bit about fair play. It's always been a vital component of orienteering, And to a large extent, we rely on competitors and officials to act fairly. But as orienteering develops, the rewards for success are greater. And so therefore, the incentives to cheat are greater too. And as orienteering takes place in new regions with different cultures, some education may be required about fair play. And of course, this topic really came to the fore after there was some cheating at the military championships in 2019. So prior to a competition, it's important to say what are the embargoed areas and what is not allowed. And you have to be realistic, especially with sprint. Ensure the security of course information. People will probably have old maps and they'll have access to Google and so on. But it's the courses that must be kept absolutely secret. So provide access to old maps. Remember that the local competitors from your own country can probably find them quite easily, but you need to provide equal access for the overseas competitors. And nowadays, people sometimes auto-generate the maps themselves from LiDAR data. And again, if that's available to your local competitors, then you need to think about making it available to overseas competitors, especially if there are no old maps of the area. But we can't prevent use of Google Maps or Street View, etc. So when should a competitor be excluded for unfair knowledge? Well, I'll just think about that last point for a minute. As I mentioned, this event I'm event advisor for next Sunday was organised rather late. It wasn't until September that I was asked to be event advisor, and I think the application only went in August or maybe even September for a December event. So it actually happened that there was a small event there in July, and therefore we had to decide that if we're going to use that area, then any competitors who ran there in July couldn't compete. And I was told that that was really very unfair on those competitors because back in July, they hadn't known that they were running in an area where a world ranking event was going to take place. But it would be unfair on the other competitors if they were allowed to compete because this is quite a small area being used for middle distance, and actually the event in July pretty much covered the same area. So sometimes you just have to be tough, and if competitors do have too much knowledge, then they can't compete. And especially if the terrain is unusual, then provide training and model opportunities. So during a competition, should there be a quarantine? Quarantine solves a lot of problems in stopping people who've yet to start getting information about the event, about the courses, but it is very complicated and time consuming to set up. So it's not normally used in a world ranking event. Yeah, make sure that the, well, you need to check that people are not going to be passing through forbidden line features or across forbidden areas, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And if they do, then you need to decide what to do about it. If we've I think developed a sort of standard that if someone accidentally goes into an out of bounds areas, doesn't do any harm, realizes, turns around again, comes back out again, so they've lost time, then we don't normally disqualify them. But if they have actually intentionally gone through an out of bounds area, and or even unintentionally, and have gained time by that, or then they do need to be disqualified. As you know, you can now use you can now carry your GPS watch, but you're not allowed to carry it, and you shouldn't generally carry a mobile phone with you. This doesn't usually apply to the smaller world rank events, but might apply to the big ones, and certainly the major events. You need to be careful with big screens and live streaming, because that can leak information about the courses. And there was the problem in Edinburgh where the competitors standing on the start line for the knockout sprint were able to see the big screen with their course displayed. So you really need to avoid that.
David, question.
Yeah.
How can you exclude competitors from running in the area that hasn't been embargoed at the time they were there? Then what rule covers that?
There is a rule that says if a competitor has such good knowledge of the terrain that they have an unfair advantage, then they must be disqualified or not allowed to compete. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is, but someone can look it up. But yes, suppose you lived near the area that we're using, and you ran there a lot only a few years ago, and so you know it like the back of your hand, then you probably should be excluded from the event, not allowed to run competitively, even though that was before the embargo was came into place. And the same might apply if you had mapped the area. Okay, just a word about following. Following is something that comes up a lot in orienteering, because one of the fundamental principles is that competitors are supposed to be navigating independently. And every few years we have a big discussion about how can we stop or minimize following. And so far we've decided that it's not something we can really tell the competitors not to do. It's mainly something that we need to arrange the event so that it doesn't really happen too much. That means we must have a sufficient start interval between the competitors so that they're fairly well spread out, and have suitable legs with route choice and so on, so that following is minimized. So we have this rule, except in the case of an accident, seeking to obtaining assistance from other competitors or providing assistance to other competitors during a competition is forbidden. So competitors shouldn't be talking to each other during the competition, or asking other competitors for help. But what about between competitors, coaches, and spectators? Again, we've discussed that at length over the years, and basically, if if you have a arena passage, then we can't really control what the spectators or the coaches say to the competitors. So anything goes. On the other hand, speakers do need to be careful about what they say. They shouldn't be giving away information to competitors yet to start, or even those on the course, if it would significantly help them. So after the race, if there's no quarantine, how do you prevent late starters gaining information about the course? Well, that's just something you need to think about and work out how you're going to do it. But there will always be a certain element of trusting the competitors. For example, at a world ranking event where there are other courses as well as the world ranking event courses, it may be unrealistic or too harsh, really, to remove the maps from the competitors who are on the other courses. But it may be it's almost certainly best to take away the maps from the world ranking event competitors as they finish, and then give them back after the last starter. But you are relying then on the world ranking event competitors not who've yet to start, not trying to grab a publicly available map and asking a competitor who's finished where their course went. And now we need to
Another question related to the fair play. At what point does auto-generating a map or any other attempt by competitors or coaches to create a map from publicly available data become an attempt to survey the competition terrain that is forbidden by Rule 26.5?
Yeah. Well, I think, frankly, that's we can't do anything to prevent that. We just have to live with that. I mean, obviously, in sprint competitions, one way that planners can minimize the effect of competitors having surveyed through Google Maps and so on the area is by adding in extra barriers which couldn't be predicted, but they bring their own problems. In that, if you put in a barrier across a street, you need to make it quite a good barrier, but still allow the public to go through it. Was there anything else on fair play? Okay.
No, not at this point.
Okay. Now we'll just look at some complaints and protests. The organizer must have copies of the complaint protest form available. That's a standard form which is on the IOF website. It's very much better if complaints and protests are written on that form. Eventually, we would like to have some sort of online complaints and protest form available, but that probably requires on an event or development, which we haven't managed yet. So we're still using paper at the moment. The organizer decides about complaints, and the event advisor advises the organizer. So it's perfectly okay for the organizer to ask the event advisor what should he do about a particular complaint. And it's also okay for the organizer to delegate that duty about deciding about complaints, not to the event advisor, but to someone in their team. It might be someone in the IT team, because a lot of the complaints often are about missed punches. The jury should consist of 3 IOF event advisors if possible, because they know the IOF rules. And the event advisor leads the jury but has no vote. And one reason they have no vote is because they may well have been involved in advising the organizer earlier about the issue. So the jury meets to consider protests and avoid consulting the jury on the initial complaint, because once they've made a decision on it, then they can't really be independent when the protest comes through later on. And then just a short bit on results. I know we're getting near to 6 o'clock your time, but I think we're on the last lap. There should be a suitable way of publishing results in the arena. And nowadays, that can be by a frequent, say every 2 minutes, upload to the web, so that people can see the results on their smartphones. So that's often the best way if you've got good mobile coverage. And as David said, the results must be uploaded to the IOF on the day of the race, and ensure that someone has the event or permissions and the technical ability. And any ineligible people must be removed from the results before the export file is created. That's what David was saying, that if you take it out of the export file, which also has the positions in, then you get missing positions. So those without an IOF ID or men running the women's course need to be removed. And one way to do that, if you've got a if you're using some sort of event software, might be to make a copy of the event file and then do the removals, and then make the export, so that you've still got the original file from which you might want to publish your local results. Then I think finally, something about re-accreditation, because accreditation as an IOF event advisor now lasts for 4 years, and the current accreditation period is just coming to an end. So we're going to send out a link to a Microsoft form in December to allow current IOF event advisors to apply for re-accreditation for the next period. So the requirements to stay on the list are to have successfully been an event advisor or controller at an international or major national event in the last 3 years, and also have the continued endorsement of your federation. So I think once you've filled in the form and sent it in and it all looks okay, we will then check with the federations that they still support you. And we're saying that the requirements may be waived on a once-only basis if you've done something else. I mean, in fact, we're fairly generous about waiving the requirements if there's a good reason. I mean, another example might be if you've been pregnant and just had a young baby. That may be why you've not been very active for the last year or so, but now want to stay on the list of event advisors and do some work in the future. So we've had a good number of comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. But we are still open for some general comments or questions to David. And David, you used your allotted time quite well. It's 1 minute before you should have ended. So thank you for that.
I can see the comments. So does a World Ranking event count as an international event? I'm not quite sure what that means, but certainly I would say certainly it counts as an international event. Yeah.
Do you mean it, Kel? But you can speak up, Kel, actually.
Yes, what I was asking about was the requirements you mentioned earlier, that you have to be an event advisor for an international event or a big national event. So does a world ranking event count as an international event in that case?
Yes, it does. And as I said, we just want to know that you're still keen and interested. If we didn't have a reaccreditation process, then we'd get people still on the list who really were too old or had lost interest. But having reaccreditation every 4 years prompts people to say, yes, I do want to continue. And I can see there's a question, when and where are the next EA clinics planned? I think that they're planning one in Sweden next year, but I don't think anything's definite.
Yeah, as far as I know, it would be in February, March. Probably Henrik Skoglund knows more about this, if he's still here.
And I know about the Finnish Federation's plan to organize a clinic in June related to the Jukola week, so that might be also happening.
Yes, and since who asked the question, Eric, he's from Austria. I can tell you that we in Hungary were also talking about organizing an event advisor seminar in the last month of 2025, so 1 year from now. But we will see, and you will get the information about this. And what is official is what David said, that really it's this Swedish event advisor seminar that is in the pipeline right now. Okay, any other questions or comments to David? If not, then I would like to really thank you, David, for all your time. Putting together these two presentations were really nice to have, and definitely this last one, you saw how many questions and comments we got for this, so it was really a useful one. Thank you. And with this, we also came to the end of this